Okay, I'm going to quickly pull up the doc and share that. All right, can everyone see me scrolling down the Google Doc?
It's good.
Great. Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, May 30th. This is our weekly CAPZ office hours. CAPZ Cluster API Provider Azure is part of the Cluster API Provider ecosystem. We're a sub-project under SIG Cluster Lifecycle in the CNCF, and we abide by the Code of Conduct, which essentially suggests that we all be kind to one another. Please raise hands if you want to speak. We welcome all voices. And without further ado, I see a set of familiar faces. So normally we pause to allow new folks to introduce themselves, but as I don't think that is a factor today, I'll go ahead and move on. There's no agenda item, so I think that means there's no agenda items. I think that means we can open the floor to any ad hoc items. Any requests for how we should spend our time today? No patch releases this week. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to look at just kind of updated on at least a couple of items that are on the roadmap. Just wanted to kind of get just a short discussion on that. But
Did the screen share follow the open tab to the milestones board?
you just go to the projects and then roadmap projects there.
Project.
And that- and roadmap view there. So we have the provision Azure Linux by default is one of the options.
You want an update?
Yeah.
The PR is out there. It is successfully fetching Mariner or Azure Linux images from the marketplace because we've published that version for the last couple publishing events. But it's failing for some kind of obscure reason on a couple tests, and I haven't had time to look into it.
Okay.
But I am free from some other higher priority stuff, so I should be able to get back to this, let's say tomorrow.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks for the update. We have the other one, this scalability one. Just trying to see if anybody's tried to ping Mike, or when do we think we might try and get to this at some point?
What is the ultimate goal here?
I think the ultimate goal is
in 2023, it would make sense as do we want to adopt ASO? So we've skipped right past this and adopted ASO. So what is did this morph into more of like a perf work stream just generally?
Yeah, so I think we should probably retitle, rescope, or just close and open a new issue. But I think the thing like that Matt said at the end is 2 weeks ago, establish a performance baseline. Like, what's the smallest management cluster support a large number of worker clusters? So kind of like, so people have an idea of, what shape of management clusters they should have, right? There's obviously all kinds of different sizes, but just kind of rough baselines. Like, one management cluster can handle X number of workload clusters, because we have like no baseline really at all right now, as far as I know.
Right. So, off the top of my head, the key constraint here is going to be summarizing. I'm simplifying for the purpose of a easy conversation, but essentially control plane bandwidth. So, in terms of the number of clusters, that should scale out with the management cluster. But at some point, because the way that the API server and controller manager operate on a single leader in a leader election model, they're going to be constrained by the size of the node that they're scheduled onto. So if we assume a control plane configured for identically sized, horizontally scaled nodes, which is definitely the vanilla configuration for almost all clusters that I've encountered, then the scope could be what is we can almost maybe say by cores. I know there's a lot of different flavors of particular core sizes. Like there's a lot of flavors of 4-core VMs. There's a lot of flavors of 8-core VMs. But I think that's the excuse me. The interesting thing is going to be how many clusters on a 4-core size controller manager API server until you run out of bandwidth. So
Yeah,
in
and
terms
also,
of like the CRD scheduling, all that kind of thing, resource scheduling, that's going to scale out infinitely because you could just keep adding. I mean, not infinitely, but practically speaking, it'll scale out. You can have, if you have like 1,000 node control plane, 1,000 control plane nodes. I know that's not a factor of 3, but some factor of 3 around that, then you can run a lot of workload clusters in terms of capturing state. Actually reconciling those across all your various controllers is going to be constrained by how beefy those runtimes, the host OS environment that the runtimes are scheduled onto. So if you have 2-core, 1,000 control plane nodes running each at 2 cores, it's a bit of a pathological configuration.
yeah, I think it'd be good to just have any baseline, like, because there's obviously a ton of different sizes that you could run on the management cluster nodes. And so like getting a little bit of an idea of like what's, even if you do, obviously you're going to do horizontal, scaling, add more nodes to the cluster, but uh, what's the ideal rough, you know, target node size, assuming you're doing nothing other than, running CAPC on it.
Well,
And
I think what I'm saying is that I don't know that there's an answer to that question, but I think that we can say on an 8, if you're running 8-core VMs to back your control plane, you can run 500 workload clusters or something like that. We can create a table like that.
something, yeah, I don't think we have to go super crazy, but just having some kind of baseline testing um, that we can have as a reference for people as well as for us if down the road, we, various other things could come up. We have a new version and maybe performance is better or worse. Also if we start adding Argo CD and other things to the mix, then it's like, well, how much is this us versus something else that's on the cluster? There's lots of different scenarios that I could see coming up here with this. But I think at a minimum, I mean, maybe we either need to rename the issue or rescope the issue, or I'm open to just close it and do a new one if that's what we want to do. But this does have some form of extremely related history. It's just that I don't think we care as much about the compare versus Azure SDK anymore. That's all.
Yeah. Also, I think the prerequisite to any of this is just having something like Prometheus as a blessed component in our CI, and so that someone tasked with evaluating or measuring cluster performance has something to measure, like a tool chain to use for taking measurements. So I would suggest we close this issue is probably too far away from where we need to go, and open up the next issue would just be to provide to like actually install a blessed measurement tool chain like Prometheus so that we can start doing. I mean, maybe we need to baseline like a single workload cluster, just like maybe there's a
Yeah.
memory leak that is just present with the CAPC controller manager running it all.
Yeah. No, yeah, that was a previous issue that we had pop up that we never really got an answer on. So yeah, I mean, having any common performance baseline there would be great for a lot of different reasons. Like you said, memory link could be. It doesn't. We don't have to scale. We need to scale to 5,000. You know, workload clusters or anything like that. We can extrapolate somewhat, right? So if you can figure out where the bottlenecks are, like do a single node cluster, and then when does it start to choke, right? And then what's the thing that's the biggest bottleneck? Is it the memory? Is it the CPU? Is it network? Is it what is it that's tapping out first?
Right. Okay, cool. I'm going to just close this then.
Okay.
Is there an existing issue for installing
We'd have to
Prometheus, for example?
no, so we'd have to have a new issue
Okay,
for this. Um,
let's do that offline. We need to live stream that.
yeah, sure.
But yeah, let's get that in the roadmap. That seems sensible.
Okay.
A brief update on the kind plus workload identity. Have a couple cycles today to so essentially there are one or more failing tests, which was difficult to assess status in the last 24 hours because there was a quick kubeadm regression that coincided with a run that I did yesterday. So after today, I'll know more about how far along we are. But we're sort of in the last mile of making all of the existing tests work in this new configuration. And I'm not sure what this is.
That's the self-managed thing. Work that I didn't.
I see.
I mean, the U.S. government one, I mean, we're kind of blocked on, so I don't know um, if we want to even list it right here for now. I mean, it is one that I think we should definitely do, but we can't really do a whole lot until it's unblocked. So I could maybe
Is archive
just
or delete from project? Which one is the better gesture?
no. What I'll do is I'll just remove the priority important soon.
Okay,
And then that way it should, yeah, it'll disappear here from the list.
cool.
The workload identity, I think, is just more of, I know we've been working in this space, but don't have it because it is just scoped to self-managed. I don't think we have any specific customer asks at this point. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a little confused about what that means because there are let's see here. There are scenarios in this PR that I'm running that are using workload identity on the actual self-managed cluster. So for
Okay, so then
example, if we look at, we can look at really any of these, I think. So here's a machine pool template. Go ahead, John.
Well, I think the like production use case we were talking about with that one is where you have like basically two separate service account issuer URLs, where you have one for the management cluster, and then you have a separate one for like each workload cluster. I think that's kind of what we were thinking about for that issue.
Right. And there's no reason that I can imagine why that wouldn't work. Is the idea to have a test that covers that scenario?
I think the idea is to actually automate setting up that second service account issuer for the workload cluster. I think that's what was mentioned in that issue.
I see. Okay, cool. Great. I'm with David that that does not sound like a high priority. So it's fair to track
Well, yeah, and I
that,
would
but
just say, yeah, and I would just say though that it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from you and your PR, Jack, is that that shouldn't be that hard to extrapolate from the stuff you already have in that issue that's there, right? So it's not like we're leaving people high and dry per se. It's just like, well, yeah, you might have to just take this script and tweak it a tad, and then you're good to run on the workloads.
I would say, I mean, if a user were asking me about workload identity, I would say that even with my PR, their situation has not fundamentally changed. They're still going to have to manage that. So automation, they can like use our script
Right.
as a reference and form their own automation, but the automation isn't sufficient where they don't have to think about and manage all the complexity of that distributed privileged model. I think the complexity is there. It's not clear to me how you remove that complexity. The way you do it is like behind a managed service like AKS does it. So AKS just creates a toggle, like set this up for me. So in that kind of a scenario, I can imagine that seems like that fits the definition of automation. But having a script that we use in our CI isn't really a user. I don't think that's a user feature. I don't see how we
No,
could make it a user feature.
no, yeah, no. I mean, I think, yeah, somebody's gonna, like you said, somebody's still gonna have to, set up a workload endpoint and all that. We maybe have a script to help them automate it, but that's going to be a separate management process.
Yeah.
But you should also, it should also be like a one-time thing, ideally, right? You know, because most people that I know of that are using self-managed clusters, they're not doing like tons of single node self-managed clusters, right? They're usually setting up a self-managed cluster that's got a larger number of nodes to it. And so, you know, setting up a workload identity endpoint for this cluster that's separate from the management cluster is not like a deal breaker. Like they know how to do it, especially with the automation that's there. And then, yeah, you might have to do that once for every self-managed cluster, or you could reuse the same one, but it's not like this blocker for people using CapZ or for blocker for people using workload identity per se. Does that sound like a fair assessment?
Yeah, mostly I mean, the caveat, I know that workload identity makes cert rotation stories a little easier because you can argue that it removes the sort of lowest common denominator risk vector for not rotating certs when you're using static secrets. So you have less of an urgency to say rotate secrets every 24 hours or something because you're using OADC sort of at runtime. However, there still is a use that you could still argue that the required Azure privilege configuration for a useful workload identity setup for a cluster API management cluster is fairly permissive and broad. And so there's still, it's hard for me to say that there's a one and done solution for any of these models, which is why really the automated thing is something behind a managed service where you're already inheriting certain security opinions of the managed service with maybe some high level configuration flags that you can use. But once you're in the world that we're sort of accommodating, where someone's using Cluster API and CapZ to build their own platform, they really have to bring their own opinions, which means they have to pay the cost of implementing this by design super flexible surface area in the way that they want. So
Yeah, I mean, I would say honestly, once your kind and workload identity stuff is merged, to just do a reference point on how people, here's the script on how you could set this up, and then just probably close this issue out.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we need to. I think you'll have converted everything, including some of the self-managed tests, to use workload identity, and trying to go yet another mile to try and automate the thing for the other agents, I think is not necessary.
Yeah.
I think people just need to know, here's how I could do it, and then they're fine, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's good. I think we're clear on that. Cool. How's that coming to automate kind of work other than
Yeah, as I said before, it's mostly done there. There's we have to go through something like 16, 18 different test permutations and make sure that there's no breakage. And there was breakage probably on half of those tests. So it's just been a process of triaging each test that required that was dependent on the existing service principal flow for one reason or the other, fixing that test. So we're almost at the last mile. Yesterday, as I was mentioning, there was a kubeadm regression that was temporarily in upstream Kubernetes master. And the remaining tests just so happen to be the tests that do Kubernetes builds during the test run against master branch. And so that battery of tests all failed. But that has been, I think, addressed overnight. And there's a bunch of tests in progress now.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. Anything else? All right. 34 minutes of our time back. Thanks, folks.
See you next week.